Hello, and in this video I'm going to scatter around props on our terrain. So in previous video I made it as a terrain, as you can see here. So you have the basic landscape. And now I want to use this to then scatter around cliffs, rocks, some foliage and so on. I'm going to start out with actually using a split node. So with this node we can then slice the terrain in multiple pieces. So here I have one piece, and then we can loop over all the pieces, or you can just see the big tile at once here. Now the reason why I will be splitting the pieces is for later on in my PGG network, because this is a quite big terrain and I wanted to divide it into multiple parts. So in Game Engine I'm not loading the whole terrain, but only loading the pieces that are around me. So if I'm walking here in the corner, I only need to load a certain part of the corner and not the whole scene. So in this case, let's start out with, maybe we can do a 2x2 for now. And this can give here a good representation of what I want. So I'm definitely looking now at the moment for something that has a lot of height variation, so I can clearly see where certain rocks and cliffs will be placed. Now from there, I'm going to convert this in the height field. So this is now actually geometry. And with the slider of density, we then can increase the amount of polygons. So normally 1 should be fine. We can lower this if we want to as well. Then I'm going to use some new nodes of Houdini 18.5. And I'm going to start out with the mask by feature. And we're going to use this to then mask certain parts. So as you can see here, I have this red mask layer. So normally when you click this handle, you should be seeing this mask. You can always double check here the visualizer if this is on or off. Now there are a few things I want to do here. So I want to start out with placing the cliffs. So I want everything that has a big slope. So I'm going to go here to the direction area and I'm going to lower down the maximum angle. So let's try maybe 30, 33 maybe, something like that. And I also then want to invert the mask, so we can do that at the bottom here, and we can remap our current mask. So this is currently what I'm using, so the combined mask. So that means that we can combine all these different settings together. And I'm going to here invert this. And we can here play around with this as well. So we can select something like this. And if you would think that this is too much, we can then always later go back and then make it more subtle. So we will be able to have a lot of cliff rocks here and there. So it will be cool to see. Now from there, I'm going to use a new node called scatter and align. And then in here, we're going to go to method, so the point count method, and we're going to go density. So we can control this by an attribute. And of course, I just created a mask. So I would like to use this here. So mask. And now you can automatically see that all the points are here placed. Now, of course, this is a lot of points in that area. So at the moment, I just of course want to start out with my big shapes first. So I have these big models that are from Quixel and I want to place them there. If you have followed the previous tutorial about the runes, then those will be quite similar as I did before. So first of all, I'm going to lower density. Let's start out with maybe 0.01. And I think that's good enough for now. And then we can go further here to more settings. So we have orientation mode. So here, this will be the alignment. So if pieces are not aligned well, I can always go back here. I can also add random rotations here as well. Then point generation, I can relax the shape. So this will basically relax the points. So you can see a few points will be moving around and the spacing between them will be a bit more even. So if I put this to basically 0, there will be more random and this will be more even. Now also here interesting is the output with the attributes. So by default we will output a piece scale, so it will automatically scale the pieces, and it will also set orientation mode. Now in this case, let's already load in our models and see how that looks. So here I have my models, and again, these are from Quixel. So I have two variations. I have this one, and I have this one. So these are my two rock shapes that I want to use in my system. So since I want to copy paste two variations, I also have an attribute with the variant name, and this also then has a value 1 and a value 0. So next up I will create a random attribute, so random attribute, and this random attribute will output the variant, and this will either be 1 or 0. So I'm gonna go here, call this the variant, then we're gonna go to uniform discrete, then fill the size of the minimum value is 0, maximum will be 1. And if I would look into my sprite sheet and search for the variant attribute, we can see that it is either 0 or 1. And of course, I set the dimensions here to 3. This should be 1, of course. So here I either have 1 or I either have 0. So it will randomly create that for us. Now one thing we need to do here as well is we need to cast this from a float into an integer. So cast variant from float to an integer. Now grab a copy to points, and we're going to copy paste the models now on the points. Now in the copy to points, I'm going to here then use the variant. So by default it will use variant, and I can already see some weird misplacement and so on. So first of all, let's go back to the scatter and align, and I'm going to disable the scaling for now. And as you can see, this already is one of the things that I would like to fix, is I will not include the scaling from this one here, because it's way too different. And then we're going to try and see how I can rotate these better. Now to fix some of the orientation, I'm going to go back to scatter line. Going to of course go to the orientation and alignment, and in here I'm going to set the forward direction to a y-axis. Now this gives us already something interesting, but what I can see is that like my pieces are facing the wrong direction. So I'm going to go here, and we're going to go to the angle offset, and I can rotate this. The geometry here is on the front side, so I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees, and they are still like orientated in like this very like sloped angle way. And I'm going to go here and enable the blend normal here, and with this we can then blend between another axis. So in this case, if I set it to 1, it gives us some weird results, so I just set it to like a little bit less, like 0.8 or so. And we can see now we have like this rock wall here, these cliffs. Now the way I'm doing this at the moment is I'm instancing these cliffs. You can also decide to create new geometry. So here is a small setup if you want to, for example, create new geometry for rocks and cliffs. So in this case it's also quite dense. So what I did is I started here from the mask, and I'm going to subtract the mask, the parts that I masked. So in here I'm just saying add mask if it's bigger than 0.1. Then I'm going to use also a peak, so this will move the terrain based on normal direction. Then I'm going to subdivide the terrain to add some geometry, and I'm going to use the triplanar node from labs. So this will displacement on a height map. I used one of the mega scans, and this gives us then the cliff geometry. So it can then merge that back into the terrain, and you can have something like this, for example. So again, peak node, we can then move the terrain in, or we can push it out if you want that. So there is a lot of different approaches you can try. So if you want to have something more with instancing, you can do the same thing that I do here. Or if you want to make new geometry, you can just use the triplanar and have some cool geometry there. You can also make this more unique and so on, get more variation. Now furthermore, let's merge this with the terrain. So I'm gonna bring a merge node, grab my terrain here from the split tile. So we have it like this. And something that I also like to do is to project my cliffs into the terrain. So I'm going to use a project node, so height field projection. And I would like to project here, and I would like to here then project the geometry, which is the cliffs, into my terrain here. And as you can see, like these, you can see these marks of the cliffs here. And the blending now will be better. So you can see that the blending between my terrain and my cliffs is way better than if I don't do that. You know that this doesn't look that nice, but if we just like merge them a bit, project them at each other, it's sort of like a better blend. We can also blur this out if you want that, so we can do like a subtle blur, so it's like less hard. So maybe we can do like a very little blur, like 1.5 maybe. So this is the base setup here. What I also forgot is let's set some random scaling. So I disabled the scaling from the scatter and align because it was giving me, as you can see, these weird results. So this is not something that I want to use. So I'm gonna go and create a noise attribute, and in there we're gonna give it a float, and this is called p-scale. And then here we can play around with the values. So I'm gonna disable raw output value, maybe play around here with the amplitude a bit, like so. Also here at the bottom we have minimum and maximum, so we can boost this. So the minimum should be, let's say 1 should be the minimum, and then 0.7 should be the maximum. So everything should be in between these two values, so we have a decent scaling for that. Then we can also play around here with the size, so this will give some variation in here. So maybe like this. Also again check the amplitude maybe. So then I have integrated my cliffs. Now next up I want to scatter then rocks around the cliffs. So to scatter around these rocks I wanted also to try something new and use some of the new features with Houdini 18.5. So I'm gonna start out by a mask that controls areas around my cliffs. So I also disabled that material from the terrain, and I'm gonna here then use distance from geometry. So this will calculate the distance between input A and input B here. So my first input will be my converted to height field to geometry, and then my other input will then be here. I'll put this on the side for a moment. Will here be this output here. So let's plug that in over here. So now we are calculating the distance from the cliffs to the geometry. But this is not exactly what I want. But in here I want to change some of the values. I'm gonna output a mask instead of attribute. And you can already see that this gives us this result where we have these red lines here. And I want to change this radius to 10. So we have, as you can see, exactly what I was looking for. So the radius of this area. And now I'm gonna play around with the RAM to fine tune this area more. So maybe I can go for something like this. So I leave a little space between this part and the other part. So maybe we can even go higher, let's say 15 or 20, and have something like this. And now I basically want to do the same as before, and I want to use this mask in a scatter and align node. So here scatter align, And we're going to use this, of course, in a density method. So density by mask. And now we have basically rocks around the cliffs. So this is some new ways of doing that, which is of course very easy. We can always go back to the ramp here, play around with the ramp. Let's say if I want to have more, like 50, and now we have like way more distance there. So I think 20 was okay in this case. Now in this scatter align, let's also change some settings. So let's change the coverage to 1. And I'm going to lower, of course, the amount of points. So let's start with 0.05. So it's way lower, maybe even less. Let's do 0.4. And in there, we're also going to set the relaxation to 0 in this case. So because stones are not really that sort of like evenly spaced out, we can always set this to 1, so they are a little bit less overlapping. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use another scatter node. So scatter and align. And I'm going to go back here from the first input. And I'm going to plug in then here my scatter align as second input. And I can now scatter points around these other points. So I'm going to go here at the top, change the method to scatter points around constraint points. And now I'm going to create sort of like clusters around these points. So these points is controlling where my clustering will happen of stones. So in here again in the scatter align, I can, for example, use the density again, and I can use that mask. And then we have this result, and I want to of course set the scale to something way lower because there are too many points. So let's start with 0.1. That's okay. We can always here go to the radius scale and we can increase here quickly everything, or we can lower it also. I'm going to keep this to 1. And further from here, I want to like have some more visuals on this. I'm going to do a copy to point, and I'm just going to copy sphere for the moment. And as you can see, this will automatically scale the sphere as well. In this case, I noticed that the sphere here is super big, so I will look in that later. But let's bring this in here with the other results. And my spheres are looking a bit too big, so I'm just going to scale them down. And that's okay. So we have some nice rock scattering around my cliffs. But I want to fix also this issue with these weird scaling. So what we could do is we could, for example, use a remap. So attribute remapping. And then in here, I'm going to control the output of the p-scale. Let's go compute range. So they go from 1 to 126, so that's pretty high. So I would like to remap this from, let's say, 1 to 10 maybe. Or maybe 50. Okay, yeah, that's better. So we have some control in there, so it's not that random. So we still have some of these bigger ones here. I mean, they could be nice. We will see that in Game Engine how that visually looks. But in this case, it's okay. We can always build a system to delete parts that are way too big. I can also go here into my seed and play around with that. So play around with the seed values. And we now also basically remove these bigger spheres. Now a cool thing here is I can just copy paste the scatter line, and this was for example for the rocks, and I also want to scatter around some basic foliage, so I want to have some basic foliage around my terrain there. So I can just change the seed, then it should be okay. I can maybe play around with this, maybe lower it a bit, so 0.7. I'm going to copy paste this here, and I'm going to give this a color. So this is my foliage, so I'm going to visualize it with green. I can also here stretch this, and let's see how that looks. And this is then my foliage. Let's merge that in with the other ones. Now I have these foliage. I think this is of course way too much. And we're gonna go back here. I'm going to lower the coverage. Maybe that will help a bit. And I will also here the density set this to 0.1 or 2. Let's try 0.1. And that did not help that much. So I'm gonna copy paste this one here. And I'm gonna set this one to 0.1. Also here for the alignment, I changed this to the blend here. So I sort of force it to look more upwards. We can then blend between the terrain direction and the upwards direction. So maybe a little bit of both. And then we have something like this. So there's still quite a lot of them. And maybe scale it down. So it's more like that. I think this is a good start. So we have some of these basic rocks here, so that's pretty cool. And that was it for this part. So we mainly focused around scattering models and props in the scene. So of course, most of what you see now here in Houdini is more temporarily, just for viewing. And I will replace all of these points in Unreal with a real model. So I'm going to instance the point clouds. So the final output will basically be this, just these points, and then we will replace this with the original model from Unreal, like a rock over the cliffs and so on. So this is what we have now. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you on the next one.